If you ask me who my favourite platforming hero is, I would immediately answer with Sonic. But if you ask me for my second favourite, the answer's gonna be Gex.
It's tail time!
The perception of this character in series has shifted over the years, for the worse. The most common view seems to be that it's bad and dated. When people wax nostalgically about the glory days of collectathons, they rarely bring up Gex. It's sad because when I was growing up, these games, the second and third one anyway, were some of my favourite 3D platformers. My channel is usually about Japanese games. Gex is not Japanese, except when he is. But I will talk about him anyway, whether you like it or not. So first of all, I want to give something of a character analysis of Gex himself. Which I know sounds like a joke, but I'm cooking here, trust me. He's an extremely misunderstood character in that people just lump him in with the many failed platforming heroes of the 90s. You know the kind. The ones that were trying to have a bit more of an edge and attitude to them in the same vein as Sonic. These were the subversive mascots, the alternative to the squeaky clean, kid-friendly characters such as Mario. Perhaps the most infamous figure to come out of this was Bubsy, who is genuinely awful. Shockingly, he's what people tend to misremember or misrepresent Gex as. An annoying, wisecracking piece of shit who acts like he's too good for his own game. Gex, on the other hand, is much more nuanced and likable than people like to give him credit for. He may be a wisecracking Gecko, but it makes sense considering his character. You don't need to look any further than the opening cutscenes of the games to know this. But because it's too good not to include, I'm going to read the entirety of his origin story, which can be found in the manual of the first game in the series. Hawaii, a lush tropical paradise, famous for many things. Magnum P.I., Hawaiian Eye, that TV show starring Jack Lord's hair, and most importantly, the world's largest population of gecko lizards. That's right, geckos. And one family of geckos in particular had a very special problem. Deep in a valley on Maui lived a gecko family that was just trying to make ends meet. Mom had her paws full raising 3.5 kids. Their numbers were dependent upon their regenerative powers, while Dad was away doing research for NASA. Gex, the oldest offspring, was a bright lad who would spend his days with his friends, surfing, playing the ukulele, and throwing poi parties down on the beach with the local lady lizards. That all changed though the day his mother got a call from NASA telling her the tragic news. The rocket containing Dad and 10 other volunteers, chosen to see if they would eat tapioca pudding in zero gravity, had exploded on the launch pad due to a band-aid floating in one of the fuel tanks. The family's carefree upper-middle-class life was shattered. While the rest of the family dealt with their grief in the usual manner, crying, infighting and rummaging through Dad's stuff, Gex bottled up his feelings. He took refuge in front of the only thing in the house that had always provided him with undemanding comfort: the TV. Gex found out that in his time of need, all of his old and sometimes forgotten friends were still there, ready to take his mind off his troubles. There was Kimber the White Lion, eager to take him on an adventure through the African savannas. The $6 Million Man would stop by with a quick bionic pick-me-up. The Partridge Family would play a song, and then shake their heads at the wacky antics of Mr. Reuben Kincaid. These were Gex's true friends, and he was willing to spend the rest of his life in their groovy company. Try as she might, Gex's mom could not pry her son away from the boob tube. So, after consulting with the family minister and the weird guy at work, she decided that it was time for a change of scenery. They were going to leave Hawaii and start a new life, in California. 1 week later, a moving van pulled up in front of the family's new ranch-style home in Encino, California, surrounded by white picket fences and white supremacists. As the moving men uploaded a crate containing Gex and his beloved TV, his mother exclaimed that she was excited about the family's new beginning. Gex just laughed and told her that was exactly what Maud said to her husband after she went through menopause. Gex was still having trouble dealing with his father's death, but Mom thought she knew just what to do. That night, the doorbell rang, and a burly older lizard came in carrying a basket of treats. He said his name was Harv and he lived next door and wanted to welcome the new neighbours. As he passed out various chocolate-covered bugs to Gex's siblings, Harv mentioned a little too loudly that he had one spot left on his Saturday All-Pro Girl watching team, and was wondering if there was someone around to fill it. Gex told him, from in front of the TV, that Jack Tripper was available, but only if he could get out of the 2 dates he had made for the same night. Harv seemed a little confused. He whispered something to Mom and then took a seat next to the tuned-out Gecko. Then Harv asked Gex straight out if he would like to take that spot on the team. Gex replied that he'd love to, but had promised Bosley that he would watch the Angels for him all week. Harv chuckled and suggested that maybe Gex was watching a little too much TV and needed to get outside. Without taking his eyes off the set, Gex explained that the last time he had gone outside, his dad blew up surrounded by gallons of burning tapioca. Completely out of ideas, Harv bid Mom an exasperated farewell and left. Now what was a concerned mother to do? The next morning, Gex came running downstairs, expecting to have breakfast with the banana splits as usual, when he froze in his tracks. The TV was gone. This must be some kind of joke. Was it out for repairs? Did someone break in and steal it? Come on man, this isn't funny. The room began to spin. Gex needed a TV fix. The little suction cups on his hands were beginning to twitch. What the hell was going on? Just then, his mother came in the room. "If you're looking for the TV, I gave it away to some gypsies this morning," she said. She told him that enough was enough, and he needed to start doing things like a normal gecko. Go catch some flies, practice walking up walls, enter a tongue lashing contest, but for cripe's sake, stop watching TV! Gex couldn't believe this. The one thing in his life that had meaning was gone, and his mother was behind it. Exploding with rage, Gex announced that he was never setting foot inside this TV-less house ever again, and stormed out the front door. Mom ran after him, begging him to stay, but it was too late. She had done the unthinkable, and this was the result. The next few months were a blur. Gex hooked up with some local punks and spent his days skateboarding to the mall, hanging out in comic book stores and blaring music through his Walkman on a cliff overlooking the city. He slept in a friend's garage and made pocket money doing errands for frustrated housewives. His entire existence became one long aimless haze, with none of his TV friends around to help out. This seemed to be how he would spend the rest of his life. Or was it? One day, as he was skateboarding along, talking to his invisible buddy, the mayor, life on the streets does things to a gecko, a long black limo pulled up. Gex was about to have his honor go insult the driver, when the rear window rolled down and he saw his mother. Mom told Gex she was so glad to have finally found him, because she had fantastic news. 3 days after he had left, Gex's great-uncle Charlie had kicked the bucket and left his entire estate to the family. The amazing part was that, unbeknownst to the family, Uncle Charlie was the original model for the Izod shirt logo. He'd invested his meager modelling salary back into company stock. At the time of his passing into the great beyond, Uncle Charlie's estimated worth was over $20 billion. The family was rich. Shocked out of his mind, Gex jumped up in the air, told the mayor he had just been impeached, and hopped into Mom's limo. The hard times were over. He was going to start living life right. For the next few weeks, the entire family went on a mad spending spree, buying houses, cars, local judges, and politicians. Mom purchased 51% ownership in NASA, and then fired everybody, sold the rockets to some third world countries, and converted Mission Control into a theme restaurant featuring robotic dancing chimps wearing spacesuits. Gex's siblings said they had always wanted to see Australia, so they bought it. Gex, on the other hand, was not into all the cars, jewels, and other extravagances. He took his share of the fortune, tucked it into his pants pocket, and went for a walk. He walked and walked and walked, wondering what to do with his share. Then it hit him. He would use the cash to fulfill a long-time dream. Exactly 1 hour later, Gex called his mother down at her restaurant, Space Monkeys, and told her goodbye. He was going back to Hawaii. He was going to buy the biggest house on Maui, fill it with the world's largest TV set and enough food for decades, and then seal himself inside. He was going to spend the rest of his life watching all his old TV friends getting into outrageous situations or amazing adventures. Mom wished him the best of luck and then ran off to rewire some faulty chimps. Gex hung up the phone and headed out to build his dream. In a few days, Gex was parked in front of his TV, munching from a nearby bowl of flies. He was in the middle of flipping through channels to see what was on. Nope, 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 he droned as he clicked the remote again and again, surfing through reruns of Kung Fu Theatre, a wacky cartoon and an old Indiana Jones movie. Those shows were so boring. He'd already seen all of them at least 1,000,000 times. He was ready for something different. Frustrated, Gex started clicking all the remote's buttons rapid fire, speeding through the channels in a super fast blur. While he was clicking and kicking back, a fly buzzed by. Gex flicked out his tongue and, gulp, down it went. But the fly was, in reality, a metallic transmitter. Gex was bugged. Suddenly, Gex's remote jammed and the TV blanked. A huge hand shot out of the screen, grabbed Gex by the neck and... Just like that, Gex had been yanked through his TV into the media dimension. The cold claw belonged to Rez, who had hooked Gex with a bugged fly. Rez was the lord of the media dimension. He now intended to make Gex the new network mascot. Out with the peacock, in with the gecko. Gex could only escape by getting his paws on the remote controls hidden throughout the media dimension. Once he had the remotes, he could destroy the TV sets that blocked the exits and were the portals into the next worlds. Gex had to find the last remote, blow up the last TV in the last world, and make it home. Or spend the rest of his Gecko life as a bronze network mascot. That's a bit of an elaborate backstory, but you get the idea. Gex becomes a couch potato to escape the pain of his father's death. This explains his most famous character quirk. His habit of spouting TV and pop culture references related to the theme of whatever level he's in.
Red rum, red rum.
They're not just random comments, they're an indelible part of who he is. He quips to escape the pain. Well and truly, Gex is a character that represents the unhealthy habits of escapism. He became so obsessed with television that he literally got sucked into it and must defeat Rez to escape. But who is Rez exactly? Well, in the first game, he's just the ruler of the media dimension, a personification of escapism itself, if you will. The sequel, on the other hand, would reveal that Rez is actually Gex's father.
Okay then, Dad. How about we forget all this and go and play footy in the garden?
And yes, this is just a silly Star Wars reference at the end of the day, but it's one they stuck with going into the third game. And it does make a lot of sense that the being that keeps sucking Gex into the TV is the very same he tries to escape by watching it. Essentially, Gex's problems always catch up to him in the end. Gex, in many ways, embodies an archetype that resonated with the disaffected youth of the 90s. The slacker anti-hero. They're anti-authority and use mockery as their main means of rebellion, but are usually confused about their place and purpose in the world. Perhaps this serves as a commentary on the state of 90s pop culture. It was long past the era of families gathering around the tube for an evening of entertainment. We had officially entered the age of isolation and cynicism, which has only become more prevalent as the decades have gone by. But none of this is what people are talking about when they accuse Gex of being dated. They're mainly just talking about his references, which have become increasingly impenetrable as time has gone on. For every reference to something timeless and iconic like Star Wars and Scooby-Doo, there's a line from an obscure TV ad that even people who were around in the 90s probably don't even remember anymore. I've never really seen this as a bad thing though, because, for me at least, the enjoyment of a reference tends to be proportional to how obscure it is. Let's say, for example, I made a reference to Star Wars right now. Handshot first, hello there, wretched hive of scum and villainy, you get the idea. That shit is so mainstream at this point, I doubt anyone's gonna get anything out of that. But if I just randomly made a reference to a certain school desk scene from Tsubihebe, I just made a lot of Tsubihebe fans feel really clever for possessing esoteric knowledge of visual novel kino. And I think the same principle can be applied to Gex. There's value in weird dated references, even when you yourself don't understand it. The important part is that you understand that Gex, as a TV fanatic, is making a reference to the only thing he really understands: media and pop culture. Admittedly, he's literally me, guys. I can't be the only one who's thought this over the years. I can't relate to Mario saving a princess, bing bing wahooing and jumping on Goombas, but I can relate to spacing out in front of the TV and randomly quoting movies I enjoy. People hate Gex because they see too much of themselves in Gex. He's like the Shinji Ikari of 3D platforming heroes. Comedian Dana Gould provided Gex's voice for the entire trilogy. In the original US versions anyway. Some regions saw fit to localize the references so they could be better understood, which gave us different versions of Gex. I grew up with the British voices of Gex from the PAL versions of the second and third games, so I'm going to be talking about those in more detail when we get there. Did you know Japan got their own version of Gex too? You might have seen these bizarre Japanese covers floating around with the weird redesigns of Gex that don't actually match the in-game graphics. The first game has the intro dubbed in Japanese, with Gex being played by an unknown voice actor. The rest of the game retains Dana Gould's voice though, so one has to wonder why they even bothered. A bit more effort was put into the Japanese version of Gex Enter the Gecko, which isn't even called Gex anymore. It was retitled Spintail, and Gex and Rez were renamed Reno and Ranald respectively. Gex is voiced by Japanese comedian Mitsuo Senda here. This version has some other weird localization changes, like a lot of the English text being removed. This is a bit unusual considering Japan's love of using random English words and stuff. Aha, so Japan got screwed over in the localization this time, and the tables have turned. The third game never even got released over there. A shame considering it's the only one with the anime channel. But I suppose it is more of a Western series at heart. I can see why it didn't catch on or resonate with the Japanese. Anyway, it's time I gave my thoughts on each game in the trilogy.
Gex. 彼ほどスマートなバッドガイはいない。アメリカ発の次世代 3D キャラクターアクションゲーム。
The first Gex was initially released for the 3DO in 1995 and would become something of a mascot for the system and its developer, Crystal Dynamics. It was later ported to real video game consoles like the PSX and Saturn later that year, but for some reason without the save system from the 3DO version. It instead has a password screen, which basically makes these versions completely unplayable unless you're using an emulator with save states, and the cheat that gives you unlimited lives. So up to this point I've pretty much been gushing about how much I love Gex, which is true. But I wasn't really talking about this game. I never grew up with this game. I never even beat this game until recently, although I have tried several times in the past. The awkward truth is that I hate this game. Not because of Gex himself though, he's great. But this game comes from an era that I'm not exactly a fan of. The brutally hard, early 5th generation 2D platformer. The first Rayman also fits this mold. It's the only 2D platformer in the series, if you don't count those. Nevertheless, it establishes many of the series' trademarks, like levels being based around different genres of TV and movies. It's not a collectathon, but strangely, it has some early elements of it. The levels are very linear, but you still have to find the remotes in them to unlock the subsequent levels. It almost feels like the game wanted to be more exploratory with its level design, but couldn't execute it very well in 2D. As someone who played this after the 3D games, it feels like a rough prototype of what the series would later become. Even Gex's moveset feels like something designed more for a 3D platformer, rather than a side-scroller. The main issue with this game though is that it's incredibly frustrating and unfun.
That's as much fun as being Mike Tyson's cellmate on Valentine's Day.
Gex has a huge sprite and hitbox, and every enemy feels annoyingly effective at killing you. There are too many instances of you tail-whipping enemies and killing them only to take damage anyway. The platforming and movement don't feel much better either. Gex feels too slow normally and is too fast and slippery when holding down the run button. The tail whip has unnecessary momentum to it that can shoot you off a platform if you're moving even a little bit. There's also some extremely trollish level design going on. There are parts that are obviously just designed to mess with you. There's an auto-scrolling level, and even an auto-scrolling boss, which is something I've always hated. If you're gonna kill me off camera, at least put spikes there or something. The bosses in general are quite bad in this game, especially the turtle from the jungle world, which has some of the worst hitboxes I've ever seen. At the very least, the final battle against Rez is decent enough. It's definitely my least favourite of the Rez fights in the series, but it's the highlight of an otherwise bad video game. While you can just beat the game normally, there's some challenge levels that you can unlock by doing all the bonus stages. They're all very gimmicky and showcase the very worst the game has to offer in terms of level design. I know this game has its fans, I think. Do I know that, or am I just saying it? I'm sure this game probably has its fans, but I can't stomach more than 20 minutes of it at a time. Beating this game was one of the worst times I've had. Let's not talk about Gex 1 anymore. 'Tis a silly game. Back in the YouTube videos in the 2000s, I used to hear that the first game was good because 2D platformers are superior to those yucky 3D platformers and their bad cameras. That's some Gen X cringe, bro. Now that I'm the one making the YouTube videos, I say it's very much the opposite. Gex had an unrocky transition to 3D, as in it made the series not dogshit. Gex Enter the Gecko, or Gex 3D Enter the Gecko as it was known in my region, or Gex 64 Enter the Gecko on the N64, obviously, is where the series really begins. It was released after Super Mario 64, so the collectathon elements are in full effect. There's a hub world, you're afforded much more freedom to explore, levels have multiple remotes to collect and you can get them in any order to make it to the end of the game. Unlike the first game, which had worlds with multiple levels based around the same theme, here the themes are spread out a bit more and don't repeat nearly as often. Although they do repeat, which does lead to a bit of fatigue later on in the game, as we'll see. This game starts with my personal favourite opening in the entire series.
The next thing I know, some government goons show up at my place. It seems they've caught a whiff of old Mr. Sunshine himself. Rez! He's back in the media dimension, and they think I'm crazy enough to go back in after him. So they whisk me away to Interrogation 101. They play rough. Start giving me the business. So we negotiate a little something to cover my expenses. They throw in one of those secret agent suits, and I tell them we got a deal.
I love that Gex gets roughed up by a bunch of spooks here, but it also just has everything I like about Gex's characterization. He's not particularly heroic, he's just in it for himself. Or he just wanted to LARP as James Bond, which is also a very amusing motivation. At the end of this FMV, you can see a woman by the car. According to the manual, this is Special Agent Extra, a prominent character in the next game, which is a notable bit of continuity they stuck with. By the way, when Gex defeated Rez at the end of the first game, he apparently saved the world or universe or something, which is why they want him to go in a second time. I don't know exactly how Rez threatens the world. Neither the games themselves or the manuals ever explain how or why. Maybe he wants the TV world to encroach on the real one, like some kind of Persona villain. Something about how he's escapism incarnate and will trap humanity in a prison of their own making. We'll never know though, because it's never elaborated on. Anyway, at the start of the game, you have a choice between Toon TV and Scream TV. Out of Toon is the first of the two cartoon levels. It starts you off in this big open area to explore. You really feel the openness of this game just from this one area. Even now, when I go back to these games, I feel that initial wonder of exploring these levels and interacting with all the fun little details they put in there. I particularly enjoy the falling objects area with anvils and fat women dropping from above. After this though, you get to the more linear Looney Tunes parody section, complete with rip-off Elmer Fudd enemies and comically oversized bear traps. You can tell what they're actually trying to evoke this time around, as opposed to the Toon level in the first game, which was very abstract in comparison. The gameplay here is a lot more engaging as well. Gex's movement is precise and satisfying. There's no weird momentum jank like the first one. So the tail whip feels a lot better to use, especially with this cracking sound it makes. The tail bounce is also a lot more useful, functioning as both an attack and a means of gaining more height in a jump. What do we have here? Camera controls. This part is something people always complain about with this game, but it's a bit exaggerated. It does have a habit of getting stuck in weird places and making jumps more difficult than they should be. And if you're a modern gamer, you're probably going to be fiddling with the camera controls a lot, which produces this annoying cuckoo sound. The camera has multiple settings and they sound self-explanatory enough, but I couldn't tell you which one is better. Honestly though, this isn't too different from a lot of other 3D platformers from this era. There's this really funny mechanic they put in here that's extremely annoying, but it is undeniably very funny. Sometimes when Gex hits a wall, he'll just cartoonishly bounce off of it. But I must stress again that it is very funny. It can really mess you up sometimes, but I wouldn't want to see it gone for the world. Finally, there's the karate kick, a new mechanic they added that feels tailor-made for the Kung Fu Theatre levels. As well as being a really cool attack, it's also a good way of jumping across long distances. A seasoned Gex player will frequently use this instead of walking. This is the definitive Gex moveset that makes these games so fun and engaging, and they remain pretty much unchanged for the rest of the series. Let's take a look at Scream TV, some of my favourite levels in the game. They have a really nice haunted house vibe with some really cool enemies. I really like the flooded room here with a bunch of toilets. If there's something I don't like about some of these levels though, is that they can be confusing. I always forget how to activate the haunted elevator in this level, without fail. Frankenstein initially gives you two different directions to go when you get to this room with a bottomless pit in the middle. They put it there on purpose, knowing you'd jump in it at least once. This is the formula pretty much every level in this series follows. A common route followed by branching pathways, or an easy remote that acts as an escape for those not feeling confident enough to brave the harder objectives. Poltergex is probably my least favourite of these levels. It's pretty difficult, long and confusing without many checkpoints. Dying here a couple times is a given and you're going to be set back a lot of progress. Now's a good enough time as any to explain the bonus silver emotes. Most levels have two of them. One can be found hidden somewhere, and the other can be earned by collecting 120 items in the level. It sounds like a lot of busy work, but it isn't too hard. They all respawn when you die, and you get to keep the ones you collected. So it's actually a good strategy to just die on purpose. Silver emotes unlock bonus levels. These have you collecting items before the timer runs out. Some of them actually have unique themes, like the one resembling the TV show Cops. I absolutely love the gritty ghetto vibe of this level. I wish it could have been expanded into its own full level. I mean, it's Gex in the hood, it writes itself. That's just straight up a dead guy.
No one can defeat the Tiki Brothers.
The first boss is Gilligex Isle, where you fight the Tiki Bros. You have to hit the blue flame back at them with a tail whip. For a first boss, this is actually one of the harder ones in the game, mainly because the last guy alive likes to move around a lot. A good boss fight should be tricky on the last hit though. This is like this game's version of Papu Papu, except they might occasionally get a W. After this, you unlock a gate leading to more levels. The two Circuit Central levels were always some of my least favourite in the game. There's just something about the vibe here I've never been a fan of. Plus it's unclear what genre of television it's meant to be parodying. You seem to be inside of a computer, which is vaguely sci-fi I suppose, but that's about it. The only thing I can think of is that it's something to do with Tron, which I wouldn't have thought of if Gex didn't mention it. Anyway, the unique mechanic in these levels are using the green orbs to activate platforms to reach higher places. It uses that sound effect from the $6 Million Man when you jump on these platforms, which is the second best use of this sound in a game. The first, of course, being the Phantom Pain. The best parts of Circuit Central levels, for me, tends to be these trippy looking rooms that connect one area to the next. The camera following you directly from behind almost makes it feel Crash Bandicoot-esque. It's also just a lot more aesthetic than the rest of the level. There's so much purple here, I feel like I'm in a Dylan the Night Owl video. Kung Fu Theatre is mainly based around martial arts and chopsaki flicks. Although, amusingly enough, it's more of a hodgepodge of all Asian pop culture. Gex really doesn't make any distinction between Chinese and Japanese media with his references, which is the funniest shit ever to me. I made this simple diagram to help Gex out. Mao Tse Tung, which is just a great name for a level, is mostly based around you fighting ninjas in Chinatown, and ends with a mini-boss against a dragon that you have to kill with a cannon. Samurai Night Fever is a much more difficult variant with some of the toughest platforming in the entire game. It's all bottomless pits and floating platforms, which does make this level in particular feel very video gamey compared to the rest. I feel like the key to a good Gex level is having a certain amount of genre-accurate believability, something that was mostly absent from the first game. As you complete the different routes here, the main doors are opened, allowing you to access the last remote. It's a noteworthy bit of game design since it's the only time you're forced to go for the easier remotes before the hard one. The next boss is Mushu Pork, an upright pig with a laugh that has always stuck in my head for some reason. It has a pretty simple strategy. Make him leave the switch and flip it yourself to electrocute him. The only difficulty increase comes on the last hit when the grates are destroyed, but if you know how to beat this one, it's super easy. Probably the most pathetically easy in the entire game, but the spooky atmosphere and music makes up for it. After that, we get to the Rocket Channel levels, which are a much more discernible sci-fi parody. In fact, they're pretty much just the Star Wars levels through and through, only with stereotypical Lamaux. There's a bit of a divisive mechanic here where you have to keep refilling your oxygen to stay alive. This means that you're constantly on a time limit and don't have much freedom to look around. I personally think this is really cool, but I'm also the kind of guy who enjoys strict time limits in games. I love the change of pace that a time limit brings to the table. I love having to change up my playstyle and essentially speedrun the level. I can't help it. Next is the Prehistory channel, which I guess is meant to be based on history documentaries. These are pretty much lava levels with dinosaurs. You'll definitely want to make use of that fire power-up that makes Gex invincible to most things in this level. Speaking of which, this game doesn't have nearly as many power-ups as the first game, where there were so many that it was impossible to keep track of. I couldn't tell you what even half of them did. This one just has the fire and ice power-ups, nice and simple. By the way, this line has only gotten funnier with age.
In a land before time, when Saturday Night Live was funny.
After getting 14 remotes, you gain access to the next area with the third boss, but you need another 7 for the TV to activate. At the back of this TV is probably my least favourite part of the game. I'm not talking about the levels themselves here, just the fact that there's no new themes being introduced. You have a third Scream TV and a second Circuit Central. The feeling of fatigue really starts to set in. Fortunately though, the third boss is a real treat, and one of my most treasured memories of this game. As you can probably tell, Gexzilla is one giant love letter to kaiju movies. They went out of their way to make it as authentic as possible. You have the iconic Godzilla roar, a city that's entirely destructible, and even mini-tanks and helicopters around. It's also quite lengthy as well. Mecha-Res takes many more hits than any other boss in the game. For some reason I thought this was really hard as a kid, but it's quite easy. You just destroy the buildings whenever he jumps on them, and avoid his charging attack. Mecha-Res is kind of a funny name, considering Res is already a robot. After this, you unlock a couple more levels, but the final area requires more remotes. The final area, of course, has the final level, which has a single remote, but the actual final boss requires another 7 remotes. I've always thought it was weird they let you come here so early, only to tell you the final boss is still far off. Truly one of Rez's most dastardly trolls. Resopolis is Rez's domain, an industrial mechanical hellscape that's meant to reflect Rez himself. A cold and heartless machine. There's no particular genre parody this time around outside of the idea of television itself, but these cool disco rooms do have Gex wearing the Saturday Night Fever suit. It's such a random part of this level, but it's always just made sense to me in a way that I don't think I can articulate. Of course Rez has disco rooms in his lair, why wouldn't he? As you might imagine, this is the toughest level in the game with some absolutely brutal platforming, particularly when you get to this room and have to climb to the top. One mistake can send you straight to the bottom. The only other Rezopolis themed level in this game is a bit of a secret. There are secret levels that can be unlocked by getting more of the optional gold remotes. Mazed and Confused is the final one you unlock, but weirdly enough it's the easiest, even if it is a bit confusing to find your way through. If you're going for 100% completion, this should be the final level you play before facing Rez, a final boss that has an extremely ominous and effective build-up to it.
Another worthless opponent. You will fail, worthless lizard.
I really love when final bosses try to psych you out before you reach them. This was something that Star Fox 64 did in a very memorable way as well. Even though you start with full health here, the game still gives you a fly TV before the boss, and this is because of a fun little mechanic where a fly buzzing around you takes a hit instead. In the final boss, it's used to give Gex 5 hit points instead of 4, but you can use this strategically in other parts of the game as well. You can even trade an extra life fly for another hit point if you want. It's a small detail in these games, but it's one I've always appreciated. The Rez fight here is far and away the best boss in the series. The first phase has you trying to lure him into the electricity in the centre of the room, which can be done a couple different ways. As a kid, I thought you had to make him dive into it himself, but this is actually a much harder way of doing it. It's easier just to tail whip him when he's dazed here. The next phase of the fight is where Rez truly got cemented into a lot of kids' nightmares. He's always had a bit of a spooky design, but when he's this big, he's just terrifying. The idea is to make him hit the switches sticking out of the ground, which can be easier said than done. Rez's hands can only be dodged from the inside, so you can't get too eager while running over to the switches. Your best opportunity comes when he's using this laser attack, but then you can't really turn around either. The final hit in this fight only has Rez smashing down his hand once. It's a very well designed final boss that still gives me a bit of trouble to this day. The best final boss is followed by the best ending, where Gex is about to bang Nikki from the Pandemonium series, a game that Crystal Dynamics also made. A peak ending for a peak game. But we're not done just yet. In the UK version, Gex was voiced by legendary English actor Leslie Phillips, whose dry, suave, and almost seductive performance leans more into the James Bond parody aspect of this game.
Pardon my tongue, darling.
He lends a level of sophistication to Gex that's comically contrasted by the silly stuff he actually says. And, you know, the fact that he's a talking gecko.
This is no time for cartoon jokers.
Dana Gould sounds like what you'd expect Gex to sound like, while Leslie Phillips sounds like how Gex probably thinks he sounds in his head. It's a rather unique voice for a platforming hero, don't you think? I would go as far as to say he's the definitive voice of Gex for me. No disrespect to Dana Gould though, who will always be the original Gex voice, as well as the writer for a lot of the gags in the games. But I just can't get over those cozy, dulcet tones that Leslie's spitting, man.
For 2 years, I started my day watching supermarkets sweep. Days, then weeks, blurred into one long, sorry afternoon chat show.
We may as well take a look at the N64 version, since it was what I had as a kid. Because of size limitations, a lot of stuff had to be removed, like the FMVs, some of the levels, and even the title screen, oddly enough. This version just dumps you straight into the hub world. It's missing some music too, like the Mushu Pork boss theme. It does have a bit of its own exclusive content though, with the Titanic level, which is hidden in the first area of the game. I used to like this level, but these days I find it a bit rubbish. The underwater section at the start is boring and has this annoying sound effect every time you speed up. And the actual Titanic part has some of the most irritating platforming in the entire game. This section at the end, where you have to make your way up to the bow of the ship, feels incredibly slippery, almost like that's part of the joke. And you can't even see where Gex is landing on some of these platforms. Insert joke about me playing this with a Logitech Xbox 360 controller. Enter the Gecko is a game that I always return to every few years. It's one of my favourite 3D platformers, but it's not my favourite Gex. That honour belongs to the third and sadly final game in the series. Gex 3 Deep Cover Gecko opens with the most epic title screen to a 3D platformer ever. The story is a bit weird though. Gex is now on top of the world, it seems. He has an office and is now a world-renowned hero or something, which I suppose makes sense after he beat Rez twice. But I do think it was funnier when he was a couch potato loser. There's a damsel in distress that's been kidnapped by Rez this time around. Agent Extra, played by Marlise Andrade, a model who appeared in the TV show Baywatch. For some reason, everyone who talks about these games act like they were only ever aimed at kids, who wouldn't have any idea about actresses from Baywatch or even understand most of Gex's references. Platformers from that era were kid-friendly, sure, but everyone played them. I think it's pretty clear that they were aiming for both demographics in equal measure. I don't know, this is just an argument I've seen made too many times in relation to these games. Personally, I appreciate that there's some adult stuff in there that I couldn't understand as a kid. Regardless, I think Agent Extra's inclusion in this game is one of its weaker aspects. She frequently shows up on Gex's watch after levels, and the two share some flirtatious banter related to whatever the level's theme was. It's not particularly funny, and their dynamic lacks any interesting chemistry. Whenever Gex makes a dumb joke, she just plays along with it with a smile like she's used to hearing them. Which yeah, makes sense, but doesn't make for good comedy now, does it? I know this sounds weird considering it's a human and a gecko, but I think the problem is they're too good of a couple. It's too wholesome. There's no edge or conflict. I've never felt like it matches the tone of the game either. Also, I just don't like the idea of Gex trying to save a bimbo. It's the least based motivation he has in all of these games. There, I said it.
Was this story based? Not this time.
I do love some of the other new characters they added though. Gex now has a butler named Alfred, a walking tutorial character who replaces the floating question marks from the previous games. I enjoy his commentary and the bits of character that they add to him.
Back in 42, we used machine guns to shatter searchlights, sir.
There's a couple new playable characters with Rex and Cuz after you free them from the levels they're trapped in, but they're pretty much just reskins of Gex himself and can only be used in the secret levels. They're kind of a bizarre inclusion, honestly. I don't even know why they bothered. In the UK version, Gex is played by actor Danny John Jules, best known to me as a kid as the cat from Red Dwarf. I think he's a pretty good Gex, but he doesn't really bring anything new to the table. He has the same level of cartoonish exuberance as Dana Gould, making the two pretty interchangeable to me.
The Gecko did it. He had motive, opportunity, and sneaky little eyes.
Even though this is something that only happens in other regions, I do like the idea of Gex having a different voice actor every game. It feels like a running gag in and of itself. The hub area this time around is the Gex Cave. Gex is doing pretty alright for himself now that he has his own giant lair. He's basically James Bond crossed with Batman in this game. It's definitely a step up from the previous one, with a lot more secrets to find and items to collect. There's also a lot more going on in terms of visual variety. I love that the levels are in places that match their themes. They give you a little taste of what you're in for. It makes it feel so much more artistically cohesive and distinct, something that's also true about the levels themselves. My favourite thing about this entry is that themes no longer get reused to the point of exhaustion. Every single level has its own unique genre parody, which is refreshing and was definitely the right way to go with it. It makes the levels feel much more memorable this time around. One of the appeals of these games is wondering what the next level spoof is going to be, something that goes out the window when you're seeing the same one too often. Even the bonus levels in this game have their own unique themes for the most part. Also, Gex always has a new outfit to sport. You pretty much never see him out of costume in this one. Anyway, the first level is Holiday Broadcasting, a Christmas-themed channel that has a nice cynical edge to it. You fight these dickhead elves and even an evil Santa for one of the remotes.
You're on the list.
Pretty much every level in this game is very open and rife for exploration, like the very best levels from the previous game. This is why I think this one is the best in the series. It only improves on the formula. The only exception to this is the boss fights, but we'll get to those later. You have the ability to swim this time around. Remember when everyone complained about the swimming controls in games? It feels so quaint now. I feel like I used to hear this a lot in old YouTube videos, but I never quite understood it. I've never had any issues with them, and this game is no different. Mystery TV is the best level in the game. Something this sequel has in spades is atmosphere. This one really nails the feeling of a spooky murder mystery. Flipping the switch upstairs makes the taxidermied bears come to life, which is revealed by this ominous little cutscene that used to scare me as a kid. This level in general also doubles as a horror level, with the bloody coolers returning from the last game's Scream TV. The two themes complement each other quite well. You even get to become Vampire Gex, which is the first costume in the game that gives Gex the ability to glide. This is used in quite a few of the levels, usually the ones that are big and open. It plays into the exploration aspect of the game rather than the pure platforming. Collecting 25 paw prints in this game increases Gex's maximum health. It goes all the way up to 8. There's also the bonus coins for unlocking the bonus levels. 4 of them in particular give an item that is needed to open the safe in the Gex cave. You can use this room to activate cheats, which are revealed by beating the other bonus stages. I like how this aspect was handled in the previous game better, where beating them would eventually unlock secret levels for the rest of the remotes. You don't even need to beat most of them here to get 100% completion, so they feel a bit superfluous, especially since all of the cheat codes can just be looked up online nowadays. Tut TV is the best level in the game. It's ancient Egypt themed, so predictably has you exploring a tomb filled with mummies. Similar to a lot of the other levels, the first part is always the same no matter what objective you're doing, but when you get to this room with the big scary spider, there's 2 ways you can go. The right has you riding the camel to the ancient temple, and left has 2 other harder objectives. If you're going for the remote that has you collecting all the fly coins, you have to go both, which is kind of tricky. This objective is like collecting a bunch of items for the silver remote in the previous game, only this time there's no respawning items. You have to find absolutely every fly coin in the level, making it much more difficult. It's an improvement though, because it has you exploring every nook and cranny of the levels, which is more what this one is about. In some instances, it can be a bit of a nightmare. The collectathon nature of this game makes these remotes optional for normal completion, however. Now's a good enough time as any to mention that the soundtrack to this game is great. Every track makes use of the main leitmotif that you hear on the title screen in new and interesting ways. This level has it in there as a rocking electric guitar. The Army Channel is the best level in the game. It's just an all-around fun level where you get to shoot things with machine guns and blow up buildings with a tank. They knew this was the best part because there's an entire bonus level based around it. The only problem I have with this one are the annoying grenade enemies that have a ridiculously huge blast radius, and this door that frequently stumps me. I think you have to defeat all the enemies before it opens, but I always forget about that part. The Western Station is the best level in the game. You get to scale a mountain while riding around on a donkey named El Nino. What's not to like? Yeah, that part is kind of grating, actually. But I've always loved this level anyway. It's based around westerns, but it's not as cliché as you might think. It's more like a horror ghost western because of the enemies and general dark atmosphere. The aesthetics are on point.
Go ahead. Make my lunch.
I like this game's approach of adding horror to other genres instead of having a dedicated horror level. This is one of my least favourite levels to get all the fly coins, mainly because you've got to whack these chickens and it can be very easy to forget which ones you've already done. There's also some hidden behind the watering hole, which leads to a modern bathhouse filled with a bunch of 1-ups. Yeah, I have no idea what this is doing here. I like the sound this enemy makes.
You varmint! You varmint!
The graveyard is also a very atmospheric part of this level. I definitely prefer going this route over the giant pile of shit. The Buccaneer program is the pirate level, and it is also the best level in the game. This first part is mostly based around tight platforming and making good use of the karate kick to make jumps and take out these undead pirates, which are some of the toughest enemies in the game. They're able to parry everything except for the karate kick. I like this level a lot better when you're on the deck of the ship after traversing the Wall of Death. It's home to the game's most hidden bonus coin. After this, we get to the first of the 3 boss fights. Yeah, only 3, disappointingly enough. It's a pretty clear homage to the Texas Rattlesnake himself. This part of the game was actually used for the cover of the N64 version, probably to capitalise on the popularity of wrestling in the late 90s. The fight itself is incredibly trivial though. You're probably not even going to see some of the unique animations here before you beat him. After that, we're done with Lake Flaccid, my favourite hub area in the entire game, and the series for that matter. Even these areas have remotes hidden in them if you collect all 100 of the fly coins. Next is the Mythology Network, the best level in the game? Nah, I can't do it. I'm dropping the LARP. This level is the most maddening, the most frustrating, the most rage-inducing level in the entire series. Gex 1 aspires to be as annoying as this level. I hate it so much. It's filled with a lot of tough and unforgiving platforming with very few checkpoints. Most mistakes won't kill you, but they will set you back a long way and can trap you in a loop of doing the same hair-pulling stuff over and over again. You think you'll eventually start to get better at it, but then you get worse. One single lapse in concentration, a single mistimed jump, and you're back to square one. It's a form of torture, I say. Perhaps the area that exemplifies this best is this spot from the end of the level, where you have to ride the wind on a karate kick, which is already kind of hard to do, but then you have this enemy attacking you. Killing him gives you the breathing room you need to line up the jump, but he respawns a few seconds later, infinitely. Then when you do get to the top, you have to deal with these annoying birds and platforms with very unpredictable timing. They just casually put this in here, in the middle of the game no less, like it wasn't the hardest thing ever. Needless to say, getting all the fly coins here is liable to cut your life expectancy in half. But I did it, the one time. I will never do it again. I never even got any of the remotes from this level as a kid. I just skipped it, which you can do with this being a collectathon and all. The best type of 3D platformer. But anyway, the theme here is Greek mythology, and the main gimmick is that you have to turn into Hercules Gex to break or move stuff. All of these are reset when you die, annoyingly enough. I really hate using the blue ice fly to freeze enemies so you can use them as platforms. If they get too close to you, all kinds of unexpected things happen. This level really makes me hate the mechanics of this game. Let's leave this place and never look back. Fortunately, the next level actually is the best level in this game. It's not a joke this time, I swear. Fairy Tales TV is as good of a level as the Mythology Network is bad. It's a wondrous big open level with so many fun things to do and see. Look at that PSX ray tracing, it's glorious. It's a sarcastic take on fairy tales, most notably Jack and the Beanstalk, which the entire level is based around scaling, as Gex is dressed as Little Red Riding Hood. This is another costume that allows him to glide, so you don't have to worry too much about losing progress if you fall. And even if you do, the mirrors you unlock throughout the level gives you shortcuts back up. Not that you're going to be falling down much here anyway. It's a nice, breezy level that is just fun and bouncy. Sweet like candy. There's a cozy feeling to it that I always love returning to. The best remote in this level, and perhaps the entire series, is the one that involves the 3 little pigs. The big bad wolf is loitering outside of each of their houses. He's walking around all inconspicuous like we don't see that he's plainly the big bad wolf. They put so much time and effort into this one enemy's animations. And you know what? It was worth it because he's the best enemy in the game. After you beat him, you get to personally destroy the houses of the 3 little pigs, and then put them out of their homeless misery. This right here is where the humour of this game is at its best. It's not the references, it's not the puns, it's not the pun references, it's the fun cynicism of beating the shit out of the three little pigs. We at last arrive at the level that kind of makes this game relevant to my channel. It's the best level in the game, yet again, it's the anime channel. Here Gex dons some kind of jetpack suit that looks remarkably like something out of an anime or game. The mechs in this level are pretty cool, but you can definitely tell it's a Western take on Japanese mecha. This suit though is just completely bang on. Amazing really. This level brought me a lot of joy as a kid, and that remains true to this day. I wasn't joking when I said it's one of the best levels in the game. Unlike the previous ones, there's 3 completely different paths leading to the remotes. They don't cross over at all unless you're looking to find all the fly coins. This level has great aesthetics, great music, and some of the best enemies in the game. I especially love the Japanese schoolgirls that throw a tantrum when you defeat them. You can leave them there, or finish them off. I think it's more in character for Gex to show no mercy to women, so I always finish them off. The only issue I have with this level, and it's only really something I have now that I'm older, is that Gex doesn't have any anime references. There's a reference to proto-culture for one of the remotes, but that's about it. Perhaps I asked too much of a platformer from the 90s. Onto the second boss in the game, the Lizard of Oz. He looks pretty cool and the arena is kind of nice, but this boss is just too easy. His only attack are these really slow-moving flaming balls, and summoning a couple enemies. It's basically impossible to lose here. But forget about it, it's gangster TV. It's a cartoonish take on the gangster genre for sure, but it's the 90s, so we're allowed to have gun-toting wise guys, funny money, and dudes underwater with cement shoes. That's just straight up a dead guy. This level feels huge, but it comes at the cost of slowing the game down quite a bit. This becomes really annoying when you have to backtrack across these large areas so much. It's especially annoying when you fail to grab onto these clotheslines. I swear these things are a bit bugs sometimes. Otherwise, I like this level, it's got a great atmosphere. I really enjoy setting pigeons on fire. So it's really good that this game lets me do that here as well. The final regular level of the game is the superhero show. I'm not a fan of it. It's nowhere near as bad as the Mythology Network, but it's cut from the same cloth of being overly long and a pain in the ass to get all the remotes in. It confuses you right from the get-go. If you progress far enough into this level, you'll eventually get stuck here. You have to go back and activate the platforms with the bullseyes on them. And how do you do that? You use the green slime fly, which makes its first appearance here and is identical to the green health up fly. More or less. That's some schizo game design right there. The rest of the level isn't much better. You have to use the superhero costume powers to get around, until you eventually get a permanent gliding costume. I really don't get why this couldn't have been given to you right from the get-go. The level just feels uninspired in every area. The aesthetics are kind of boring and there's no interesting superhero gags. It's not very fun, I just don't like playing this one. Like Mythology Network, I used to skip this level too. You only need 30 of the 49 remotes to beat the game, so you're afforded quite a bit of freedom to pick and choose what you want to do, which I've always appreciated. If I'm not going for 100%, it feels like no two playthroughs are exactly the same with the order of the remotes and which ones I decide to get. Okay, it's time for the third and final battle against Gex's arch-nemesis, Rez. Channel Z actually has a bit of a level attached to it this time around, but it's not a very long one. It's more of a build-up. You have to jump along these satellites and shut down the 3 generators so you can get to the final boss room. I mean, it's the best boss in the game, of course it is. Rez is always the best boss fight in every Gex game, but this one especially. The boss arena is so cool looking, it lives rent-free in my head to this day. Clearly they realised in the last game that Rez is way scarier when he's a big looming figure, so that's just how he is by default now. The strategy here is that you have to hit Rez in the chest with the slime flies and rush to the centre of the arena. His attacks here have extremely brutal timing. I could never consistently dodge them. This has the potential to be harder than 2's final boss if you only have 4 paw prints, but by this point you probably have like 7 or 8 of them, so it isn't too bad. I wish this boss got a little harder on the last hit, but it doesn't. His patterns remain static for the entire fight. Nevertheless, it's a really good final boss, it just isn't quite as spectacular as the one from Enter the Gecko. Gex saves Agent Extra, and then they fuck. The end. We're not done just yet though, because there's still the N64 version. Once again, it gets worse audio quality and loses all the FMV cutscenes, but they at least replaced it with something this time around. The cutscenes are now in-engine. They get pretty much the same point across, and I think the dialogue is the same. Honestly though, if they did outright remove these cutscenes, I don't think I would have cared at all. The opening has been replaced by this lazy still image montage, which plays every time you load your save for whatever reason, and the ending is a lot lamer. Interestingly, they did make this version slightly easier in places. Those annoying elves now go down with less trouble, and you now have more time to get the super hard paw print in Mystery TV. There's probably more minor alterations, but these are the ones I noticed. The biggest change though is the Mythology Network, which has been reworked entirely. It's not even the same level. I guess they felt the same way I did about the PSX version of this level, because they made it way easier as well. It's a lot smaller, there's less death pits, more shortcuts and checkpoints. It's just a normal Gex level now. Not an ordeal that will have you pulling your hair out. They even added a new mechanic where you can swing around using Gex's tongue on these things, but it's a little jank. A new enemy has been added that can only be killed by Hercules Gex. It's kind of annoying that Gex stops whenever the timer runs out. It didn't work that way in the original, but it does now for some reason. It's certainly an improvement, but I wouldn't say this is one of my new favourite levels or anything. It still has that smell of the Mythology Network, if you know what I mean. At any rate, Gex 3 is an absolute classic even with its flaws, and is my favourite game in this series. The next game in the series, unfortunately, does not exist. Gungrave got to come back, Gex didn't. However, it was recently announced that the trilogy would be re-released for modern systems, so it's not impossible. It's just a shame that I don't trust anyone to do Gex justice. As simple as these games are, nobody understands what they're about. Gex 4, should it get made, is most likely going to be some kind of ironic meme game, playing into everyone's misinterpretations about the character in series. Unless it's made by yours truly, of course. I am the last remaining Gex fan, the only one who truly understands his legacy. That didn't used to be the case though. There were others, like the YouTuber GexUp, whose videos were one of my inspirations when making this one. Unfortunately, he found religion or something and abandoned Gex. Why GexUp? Why? You were my hero. You were the chosen one. You were my biggest inspiration for starting YouTube. Actually, I'm just fucking around, I never watched him. But my point is, I would never abandon Gex, so here's what I would do if I was making Gex 4. I feel like we need to go back on some of the stuff introduced in the third game. A happy Gex is not a funny Gex, so he needs to be a bit of a loser again. He's fallen off. There can be some jokes about how he hasn't saved the world in 20 years and can no longer afford the Gex cave. But the point is, he's back where he was in the intro to the second game. His life has gone down a dark path since Agent Extra left him, by the way, but he finds solace in his new obsession. Anime, specifically anime women. He has a couple waifus who keep him company during dark times. But all is not well. There's something stirring in the media dimension. Rez returns with a vengeance. He's out to make Gex suffer for foiling his plans in the past, and he does so by stealing Gex's waifus.
Not my Dakimakura!
Now he has to go into the media dimension once again and stop him. I really think they should lean more into the adult side of the series. Everyone who grew up on these games are adults now, so this should be reflected. We get some more risque elements. I'm talking the kind of stuff we saw in the Gex free promo art, only taken even further. We should get some real sleazy levels and even more adult jokes. Gex needs to start a level, turn to the camera and say,
"World Economic Forum is lying to you, kids."
It can be called Gex 4, based in Gexpilled, and it will be the best game ever made. Then again, I may have just projected things onto Gex that were never there, just like the people I've been rebuking in this video. Maybe it's better if Gex stays an innocent part of the past, where it can't be corrupted by modern interpretations and revisionism. He always was stuck in the past. Maybe he was able to escape it at the end of that third game, and that's the real reason why there's no Gex 4. Maybe it's a brilliant bit of irony that Gex himself didn't get trudged out 20 years down the line for the sake of nostalgia. Maybe that's the true message of Gex, to let things stay in the past. Or maybe that's just the message the me here and now interpreted. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter that much, does it? A special thank you to my channel members and patrons. I bet they weren't expecting to first appear in a Gex video, but here they are. Anyway, I've been Snickety Slice, I'll see you in the media dimension.